The Wyoming wilderness was a harsh and unforgiving land, but for the cowboys of the Bartee Ranch, it was home. The sky had been restless all evening, a thick current of storm clouds rolling in from the west, swallowing up the stars one by one. The wind howled through the canyons, rattling the wooden posts of the corral where the cattle were penned for the night. "Storm's gonna be a bad one," muttered Jake Thornton, the foreman, adjusting his hat as he surveyed the sky. His voice was calm, but there was a tension in his jaw that didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the crew. "Cattle don't take kindly to thunder," Hank Cooper added, shifting in his saddle. "They get spooked real easy." "Reckon we should double-check the fences?" asked Will Carter, the youngest of the crew. His voice still held a trace of inexperience, but he had a good head on his shoulders. Jake nodded. "We'll ride out and make sure everything's solid. If this storm breaks the way I think it will, we don't want a mess on our hands." The men mounted up and rode the perimeter of the corral, tightening posts and reinforcing weak spots in the fence. But as they worked, the first crack of thunder split the sky, a jagged bolt of lightning flashing across the distant mountains. The cattle stirred, shifting uneasily. Then another bolt came, this time striking closer, its roar sending a tremor through the ground. The herd let out a collective bellow of fear, pressing against the enclosure. Then disaster struck. A deafening crack of lightning slammed into an old pine tree near the fence line, shattering its trunk and sending it crashing down. Sparks flew, igniting a patch of dry brush. The fire was snuffed out almost immediately by the torrential rain that followed, but the damage was already done. The cattle, driven into a blind panic, surged forward, breaking through the weakened fence. "They're running," Hank shouted, spurring his horse forward. The earth trembled under the thunderous hooves of the stampeding herd. The night was chaos, lightning flashing, rain lashing against the riders' faces as they gave chase. The open range was vast and filled with dangers, steep ravines, cactus patches, and rocky outcroppings that could snap a horse's leg in an instant. "Don't let him split up," Jake bellowed over the wind, pushing his horse harder. The cowboys fanned out, trying to flank the herd, but the storm had the cattle in a frenzy. They ignored every whistle and shout, barreling forward with blind, desperate energy. The rain made visibility almost impossible, the prairie floor turning into a slick, treacherous mess. Will's horse stumbled on a hidden gopher hole, nearly throwing him. He yanked on the reins, managing to regain control just in time. He caught sight of Jake ahead, weaving through the storm like a ghost, guiding his horse with years of instinct. "Push him toward the canyon," Jake ordered. "We can cut him off there." The men rode hard, their lungs burning from the cold, rain-choked air. They barely avoided disaster more than once. Hank's horse skidded dangerously close to the edge of a dry creek bed, while another cowboy, Lou, got tangled in a patch of prickly chaw and had to fall back, his arm bleeding from the spines. The storm raged on, but gradually the lightning began to ease. The downpour slowed to a steady drizzle, revealing the shadowed outline of the distant cliffs. The cattle were still running, but they were tiring. "There," Jake pointed ahead. "They're bunching up by the canyon mouth." The natural rock formations created a narrow funnel, giving the cowboys the advantage. If they could block off the opening, they'd be able to stop the stampede before the cattle ran themselves off a cliff or scattered deeper into the wilderness. Jake and Hank rode hard to get ahead of the herd, cutting across the front and forcing them to slow. The others rode in behind, whistling and cracking their whips to keep the cattle from turning back. It was a battle of wills, man against nature. The cattle, wild with fear, resisted, but gradually their pace slowed. The leaders of the herd, exhausted, finally stopped, their sides heaving. One by one, the others followed, their stampede losing momentum. Jake pulled up his horse, breathing hard. He turned to the others. "We did it." Will let out a breath of relief, wiping rain from his face. The storm was nearly over, the last rumbles of thunder rolling away into the distance, but the job wasn't done yet. They spent the rest of the night rounding up stragglers, checking for injuries, and ensuring none of the cattle had wandered too far into the rocky terrain. Some of the animals were limping, a few had minor cuts, but they had avoided any serious losses. By the time dawn broke, painting the Wyoming sky in hues of pink and gold, the storm had passed entirely. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and sagebrush. The cowboys, exhausted but triumphant, began the long drive back to the ranch. Will rode up beside Jake. "Reckon we'll have to fix that fence first thing when we get back?" Jake gave a tired chuckle. "Reckon so. Ain't much rest for cowboys." The men rode in silence for a while, watching as the herd moved at a steady pace in front of them. The storm had tested them, but they had come through it together as they always did. The land was wild, the work was hard, but this was their life, and they wouldn't trade it for anything. Thanks for tuning in to Fireside Stories. If you want even more stories, remember to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time that we all gather around the fire.